Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Ayin Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Joshua Waxman, in loving memory of Alex Khan, Eliyahu ben Shlomo HaKohen Veliza, father of Amy Khan, on his Shloshin, passionate and gentle teacher who touched countless lives. Today's daf is sponsored by Belima Slitsky, in loving memory of Mazal Tina Bat David Birina, her mother. And today's daf is dedicated to the refuah shlema of 3 boys from our community who were injured in the terrorist attack yesterday in Renana, one of whom is still in critical condition. Nadav Ephraim ben Shulamit Leah, Ilan Tzvi ben Sharon Salon, Gila David ben Simachana, among all those injured in the attack as well, that I don't have their names. Okay, we're going to get started with the end of yesterday's daf. Let's just do a brief review. We had this Mishna which started off with, if you were convicted of stealing by 2 witnesses, and then tavachu machar al pi echad, only 1 witness came forward and said that you slaughtered, or al pi atzmo, or you admitted that you slaughtered. So you don't pay tashlumei kefel. I'm sorry, you pay tashlumei kefel. You pay the double payment on the gneva because there were 2 witnesses, but you don't pay on the second, the two or three extra payment on the tvicha or mechira. To which the Gemara says, al pi echad is really not necessary to mention. It's totally obvious that al pi echad, you're of course not going to be convicted of tvicha. So they say, well, it's coming there to be parallel with, it's coming really to teach about the admission. When you admit that you tavachu machar, that you slaughtered it after you're already convicted of stealing, we're going to say that it's just like eid echad. In what way? Well, if 1 witness comes and then later another one comes, or 2 witnesses later come, then obviously they can convict you down the road. Likewise, if you admit and then witnesses come, in this case it would have to be 2 other witnesses because you obviously said I didn't slaughter, but I'm sorry, I slaughtered, but your conviction is not going to count. And then 2 witnesses come and say you slaughtered, we're actually going to obligate you. Even though when you admit, you get exempt from the extra penalty, the 2 or 3 payment. But if witnesses later come, you're going to be obligated. Now, this goes against something Rav says. We're going to have to figure out later, how does Rav fit in with our Mishna then? But right now, that doesn't bother us. Right now, we're going to say, our Mishna is coming to say, we don't believe that if you admit and then witnesses come, you're exempt. No, you're not exempt. You're exempt if it's all based on your confession. But if witnesses later come and convict you of something that you confess to, we're not going to just exempt you like that. And now we're going to learn about Rav Huna, who said in the name of Rav, the opposite, which is you're exempt. Okay, so now we're going to start from the Gufa. It's about 7 lines from the bottom of yesterday's daf. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Modeh b'knas, this is our topic for the whole day today. Modeh b'knas v'achar kach ba'u edin patur. So there he says it explicitly. If you admit, and it's a penalty that you're admitting, like tvicha v'chira, for example, which is just a penalty. You're not paying back the value of anything, right? Right? Or even, right, if you admit that you stole, for example, and that means you have to pay the keren, the principal, but you don't have to pay the kefel, because the kefel is a penalty. So now they say, if you did that, and then Eidim came, you're going to be exempt. Eitiv Rav Chisda Rav Huna. Rav Chisda brings a braita that questions Rav Huna. In a story about Rabbi Gamliel and his slave Tavi, you might remember Tavi was a beloved slave of Rabbi Gamliel. He really loved him, and all his days, he really wanted to free him. What's the problem? You can't free a Canaanite slave. And once you free him, he becomes a full-fledged Jew. But you're not allowed to do that. Only if the law states that he has to be freed. So there was a Maaseh Rabban Gamliel, Shesime et ein Tavi avdo. Well, he blinded him. Okay, probably it seems like it was by accident, of which the commentaries have a whole problem with, because if it's by accident, you actually don't go free. I'm going to put that question aside. We don't have time to deal with it, but know that there's a bit of a problem with the pshat here, because it's hard to believe he really did it on purpose. But anyway, let's just put that issue aside. He blinded Tavi Avdo. He was so excited. Now, this sounds crazy, right? He blinded him, but he was so excited because all his life he always wanted to free him. And therefore, now the slave can go free. There's going to be a big problem, though. Well, Mitza'ola Rabbi Yoshua. He finds Rabbi Yoshua. Now, remember, freeing your slave, we already learned this, is a knas, is a penalty. So if he admits it, well, then it's not going to be, right? And then what if Eidim come after, though? So that's going to be the issue here. Mitza'ola Rabbi Yoshua, he finds Rabbi Yoshua, Amarlo, did you hear? My slave is going to go free. Amarlo, Lama, he said, why? Amarlo, Shasimeti et eno, because I blinded him. Amarlo, Ein b'dvarecha klum. it's irrelevant what you're saying to me because shekvar ein lo edim, because you don't have witnesses. Nobody saw this happen. Now, how he knew he didn't have witnesses, it's a good question. And maybe that's why there's going to be two versions of the story. But in this version, Rabbi Yoshua says to him, well, you don't have witnesses. Now, what does this seem to imply? Hayesh lo edim chayav. Well, it sounds like if you could produce witnesses, then the slave would go free. But, so what, and now, what happened here? First, Rabbi Gamliel admitted, to who'd he admitted? To Rabbi Yoshua. So he confessed. And then if Adim were to have come, it sounds like Rabbi Yeshua was saying we'd be able to free him. So what do you learn from here? Shamina mina, knas v'charkaf ba'u edim chayav. Because remember, what does chayav mean? Chayav means you're obligated, means the slave has to go free. Right now, it's kind of a tricky story because in Rabban Gamliel's best interest is the slave to go free. But in most masters' best interest, it's not in their best interest to have their slaves go free. This is just an exception to the rule. But in general, right, that's knas, it's a penalty to the master. So now you see here that if Rabban Gamliel had admitted, which he did, he admitted, if he had produced witnesses, it would have worked to free the slave. So that goes against Rav. So now Rav Huna, who quoted Rav, comes to support his reading. And what does he say? Amar le, shane Rav Nachman de lo b'fnei Rabban Gamliel, de lo b'fnei beitin odim. He saw Rabbi Yoshua on the street and then admitted to him on the street. That wasn't a court. So what do you mean? Ha Rabbi Yoshua, beitin hava. What do you mean? He was the head of the court. Shelo b'beitin hava. Well, just because he's the head of the court doesn't mean you always see him in court. Rabban Gamliel saw him on the street, and that's why this doesn't count as a confession. And then this teaches you absolutely nothing about our topic. Well, now the Gemara says, but wait, we have a contradictory braita. V'hatanya amar lo ein b'dvarach haklum shekvar hodeta. According to the second version of the story, Rabbi Yoshua says to Rabban Gamliel, well, you're not going to be able to do anything about this because you already came and confessed. And that sounds like exactly what Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, which is, once you confess, there's nothing you can do about it. Even if Adim come, you're going to always be exempt, which in this case, again, is not what Rabban Gamliel wanted. My lav tanai. So they say, okay, we have these two braitot. Maybe that's exactly the machloket. Let's go back to the original understanding of the first case, right? Because you didn't produce witnesses, but where you would have produced witnesses, we would have let him go free. That's like we read in our Mishna. Modeh b'knas, you admit in a knas, and then Adim come, you'll actually be obligated in the penalty. And the second version is saying, once you do it, there is no. So now we want to say this whole thing is a machloket tannaim. Hi, Tana Damar. Now they're going to spell it out like I just did. The Tana who says shekvar ein lecha edim, that you don't have any witnesses, which implied if you did though, you would be able to. Savar modeh b'knas v'charkaf ba'u edim chayav. Sounds like you would be obligated with the penalty. V'hai Tana Damar shekvar hodeta, and the one who says, well, it's too late because you already confessed. Savar modeh b'knas v'charkaf ba'u edim patur, would hold like Rav, that you be exempt. To which the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Why? You could say that everybody agrees like Rav. Now they're going the other way. You could say that both of these side with Rav, that once you admit, you'll always forever be exempt. What was the machloket here then between the two braitot? And this is classic. When you have a story that gets passed around, the details always get changed, right? Nobody really knows what actually transpired. And the difference between them is not an inherent machloket about this topic. The machloket is what actually transpired. Where did he meet Rabbi Yoshua? Hi, Tana Damar shekvar ein lecha edim. The one who says, well, you have no edim, sever chutz lebeitin hava, thinks that they were outside of court. And all he was saying was, having nothing to do with a confession, he was just saying, you need to produce witnesses and you don't have any, so you're not going to be able to free him. But it wasn't a confession at all. So therefore it teaches us nothing about confessions and then edim. And that would mean, right, it basically has nothing to do with this topic at all. If he had confessed, then actually the witnesses would be irrelevant, but he hadn't confessed, and that's why the witnesses are a factor. And the one who says, well, it's too late because you confessed and it's all about the confession, savar b'beitin hava, holds that the confession was done in the court. That's clear because he says you already confessed. So they think it happened in the court, and that's why once the confession happens, you can't do anything because, again, both these braitot hold like Rav. Again, Rav comes later than the braitot, but they're basically holding by that opinion. So what we did so far, let's just review. We inferred from our Mishna that our Mishna seems to imply if you admit and then witnesses come, you'll actually be obligated to pay. Then we said that disagrees with Rav Huna, who quotes Rav. Then Rav Chisda brought a difficulty from a braita against Rav Huna, really, who was quoting Rav. Rav Huna gives an answer, and then we suggest, well, wait, there's another braita. Maybe that's the whole machloka between them, our topic. And the answer is no. The machloka between them was what transpired in the story. Was there a confession or wasn't there a confession? But actually, they all could theoretically agree with Rav. Now we're going to say that it's true, Rav said you're exempt. Shmuel argued with him and said you're chayav. So the next part is to show that Rav and Shmuel had this machloket, and then Rav brings a difficulty on Shmuel. Itmar. Rav amar patur, Shmuel amar chayav. Itmar is usually, although we'll see another use of itmar today, it's good enough to show you this. Methodologically, itmar is often, not always used, we'll see its other use. Itmar means ne'emar, it was said. But often it means it was said that there's a machloket between Amoraim, and the structure is itmar, then it says, this is the topic they argue about, and then it says, he says this, and he says that. And then often it continues with, and he says this because of that, and he says this because of that. So it's like an A-B structure. He said that, and then he said that because of this, and he said that because of this. In this case, the itmar is not going to have the he said this because of this, and he said that because of that. This time, we're still going to get that, but it's not exactly the usual structure of an itmar. Here we're going to have somebody else comes and explains the reason for Rav, and then we're going to say, well, how does Shmuel react to that? So itmar, here's our topic. Well, we already know the topic. If you confess and then witnesses come and convict you, do you have to pay or not? Rav amar patur, again, for a penalty, not for the actual value. Obviously, that you have to pay anyway. But Rav says patur, Shmuel amar chayav. Amar Rav bar ahilai, my tamadav. So he wants to know, where does Rav get this from? And this we already saw before. Im himatzeh be'edim, timatzeh be'dayanim. If this is, remember, there's chapter 22, there's the first few psukim which talk about theft, and then there's the next few psukim which talk about, right, then there's Aish in between, and then Vav Techet talk about if you give something to a guardian to watch, a shomer, and then they steal it. So we had theft in two places, and the whole kefil law in two places, which we had a whole long diyun about. Anyway, in the beginning of the pasuk, in pasuk Gimel, where it talks about regular theft, it says, Im hi matzebik timatzebi ado agnevan. It's a double language, so what is the drasha here? Rav says, Im himatzeh be'edim, if you're convicted by witnesses, timatzeh be'dayanim, then the judges will convict you of the knas. So that's basically modeh b'knas patur. Doesn't yet say anything about what if witnesses came after. This comes to exclude somebody who convicts themselves, basically confesses. If that's the case, jumping forward to pasuk 8 in that chapter, lama li me'asher yoshiun Elohim nafka. But it says in the last pasuk, Asher Yashiun Elohim Mishalem Shnaim L'Re'eu. Okay, so Imi Matzeh Timatzeh basically says you have to pay the kefil, which is a penalty in the case where the court convicts you and not where you confess on your own. But in pasuk 8 in the same chapter, it says in the context of the shomer who basically stole it for himself, says if Yashiun Elohim is not God, Elohim is the court. If the court convicts you, then you pay double. That seems to be saying the exact same thing. Only when the court convicts you, you pay double. Why would we need to say it twice? If we already got that from the words himatzeh timatzeh, right? If you're found by witnesses, then timatzeh b'dayanim, then the judges will convict you. Not if you confess yourself. Well, it says it twice. It's true. One is shomer, one is ganav, but it's both. They're really both talking about theft. So what do they say? It must be coming to add-on, which is not only if you confess, but even if you confess and witnesses came. How's Shmuel going to respond? Now, this goes back to what we saw a few dapim ago. That, right, it was on Daf Samach Dalid. Okay, what did it say? He says, himatzeh doesn't teach you this. Himatzeh we need for Chizkiah. We had a whole daf figuring out what exactly does Chizkiah say. We're not going to go back there, but it's needed for a different drasha. Remember, there was one for the ganav, one for the shomer. And we had the different, right? How do you know you pay kefil by the ganav also, and not just by a shomer that steals? And that was the time to be Chizkiah. So it's not two psukim teaching the same thing, because he chooses to learn a different drasha of it from im himatzeh. You might remember we had a whole slew of options of what those words could be coming to teach you. And that resolves that. Okay, so now we have where Rav gets it from the Psukim and where Shmuel. Rav says it twice. That must be to say you're even going to be exempt if witnesses come, and Shmuel doesn't have the second time. So, because he uses the drasha for something else, he only has it once, Asher Shiyun Elohim, only when the court convicts you, and that just teaches you Modeh B'Knas is exempt. But if witnesses came after, we're going to obligate you. Now, Rav is going to ask Shmuel a question, raise a difficulty with Shmuel from a braita. And it's a braita that we're going to see and understand even a little better later in today's talk. Eitive Rav l'Shmuel. Ra'ayidim, now this is the one that confuses all of us, this kind of a case. Ra'ayidim shemishmashim ba'im. I stole, and then I see witnesses heading to court. So I say, wait, I better get there before then, admit it in court, and then I'll be exempt. So what does he do? He runs, v'amal ganavti. So now he comes to court and he says, I admit I stole. Aval lo tavachti v'lo macharti, but I didn't sell it or slaughter it. Now, why he adds those words we don't yet know. That's going to be on Amud Bet. We're going to get back to this source. Now, the witnesses were only going to come and say he stole. So he admits basically to stealing in order to get himself out of the kefal payment. And in fact, he's out of the kefal payment. So this seems like, now there were witnesses on the way to court. So presumably the witnesses came after him. So what do you see? Rav says, even when the witnesses came, he's exempt. Amalei. So Shmuel answers, what do you mean? The Eidim must have run away. In other words, the Eidim decided, oh, he already admitted in court, we're not going to bother. And they just didn't come to court. Or for whatever reason, they didn't come to court. Maybe they were scared of him. We don't know. But the Eidim, the source never says that the Eidim actually showed up in court. So Shmuel says this doesn't prove your point. Vaha, but wait, Midatani Seifa, but you didn't look at the rest of that source. The rest of the source seems to indicate that the rabbis really do believe in what Rav says, which is even if the Eidim came, we're going to make him exempt because Rabbi Elazar, the continuation of that braita is Rabbi Elazar be Rabbi Shimon Omeo Yavo Eidim v'Ya'idu. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, bring those Eidim in. Now, why would you bring them in if not that they could convict him? Meaning, right? I ran forward to court and admitted that I stole and I got exempt from paying the extra double payment. But comes Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon and says, let those witnesses come and they'll obligate me in the kefel. Which means, in other words, now you see Michalal the Tanakama Savar Lo. So they now say to Shmuel, how can you possibly say that that Tanakama was talking about a case, or the rabbis, whatever you call them, the first opinion was talking about a case where the Eidim never showed up in court? Because Rabbi Elazar says, come and let the Eidim come, which means that the rabbis think, even if the Eidim come, it's irrelevant. Like they don't need to bother coming because they're not going to do anything, which goes against Shmuel, because Shmuel said, Modeh B'Knas, you're going to be liable. And the rabbis are saying, no, you're not. So I'm related to Shmuel. Okay, so Shmuel had a potential answer. He claimed, oh, the witnesses never showed up after him. But you can't say that because Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says. And then it seems like machlokes between Rav and Shmuel is machlokes between Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. So Shmuel says, oh, well, if you understand it like that, well, that's my answer. Lav Ika Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, the Kai Kavate. Well, you just showed in trying to tell me I don't have a good answer. I have a great answer now because there's two opinions here. One holds like you and one holds like me. So, Ana de Amrei Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. I'll just say I hold like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now, it's true. Generally, we hold by the majority position, but sometimes, as long as you have someone to hold by, it says that's the Tana I hold by. So now they want to kind of zoom out for a minute. And they say, if we look at this Tanaitic source, there's two ways to read it. One is with Shmuel glasses on. Shmuel is going to basically say, since I think Modeh B'Knas and then Eidim come, you're going to be liable. Basically, that's how I understand Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. And Tanakama is holding like Rav. And therefore it says, L'Shmuel Vadai Tanai. In other words, Shmuel can't explain the Tanakama's position like his. The only way Shmuel can read that source is they argue with exactly the same thing I'm arguing about with Rav. Rav holds like the rabbis. I hold like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. But Rav, mi lema Tanaihi, but according to Rav, it's not necessarily going to be that machloket. Rav, with his glasses on, can view this sugya, can view this source differently. And he can explain them both according to his position. Okay, which is what? Amar lecha Rav. Ana de Amrei afilu leRabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now we're going to start the second part of today's shiur, which is basically, within Rav, we're going to make distinctions. You're not always going to be exempt for admitting. Now remember this case. This was a bit of a weird case. It was a disturbing case because why did I come to admit in court? Because I saw the witnesses coming and I wanted to preempt them. That's not the same as I'm sitting in my house feeling really remorseful that I stole your stuff and I decide to come and admit it. That's a whole different situation. If I see the witnesses coming, I'm just trying to exempt myself from kefil. That's a different story. So that's what we're going to say here. I can explain Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon is agreeing with me. This case, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, if witnesses come, and as Yavoidim v'yayidu, the witnesses should come, let them come. If the witnesses come forward in this particular case, it's because the only reason why I came and admitted in the first place was because I was scared of the witnesses coming. That's not a real legitimate confession. In that case, if witnesses come, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says we obligate you. Now, the rabbis don't think so, but we start to distinguish between these cases. But if I just come because I'm remorseful and I feel bad that I stole it and I come and admit in court, even Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon would agree with me in that case. He only said in this case that the Eidim were on their way to court. Then my confession is not exactly a fair confession. And therefore, now, while it's true, we can't obligate me the kefil because of the confession. But if the witnesses come after, and because we can't obligate me because there's no witnesses, but if witnesses come, of course, we're going to obligate me. Again, rabbis say no, but Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says yes. But that's all within my position, Rav says. So there's two ways to understand that. Now we get to another very interesting distinction. So right now we're suggesting that there's a possible distinction between why I went ahead and admitted. Was it because I was scared the witnesses were going to come? Or was it that I was feeling remorseful? And then there might be reason to distinguish there. I'm a Rav Hamnuna. Mistabre milta de Rav. He's going to now limit Rav. And he's going to say there's two different kinds of confessions besides the one that I do it because I'm scared or I do it because I really feel legitimately I want to confess. But there's another type of distinction, which is not what's causing me to admit, but what are the ramifications of my admission? So let's read it inside. Be'omer ganavti, uba'u edim sheganav patur. Okay, so Mistaber Milte de Rav. Sorry, let's read it again. Mistaber Rav Hamnuna comes and says, Rav, I think makes sense. In which case, I think Rav is saying it only in this case. Be'omer ganavti. If I say I stole, I confess about the theft. Uba'u edim sheganav patur. Why? Because what was the result of my admission? I was obligated to pay the keren, the principal. And I was exempted from the extra double payment. So what's the issue here? Well, with my admission, I actually had to pay something out of pocket. But if I come to court and I say, listen, I didn't steal. But witnesses came and said I stole. So I'm convicted of stealing. It doesn't matter what I said. We have two witnesses that say I stole. I have to pay the keren, the principal, and the kefel, the double payment. But I then say, Chazar ba'amal tavachti u'macharti. Now, before witnesses could come and say, I also slaughtered and stole or sold, I come and admit that I slaughtered it and sold it. Now, at this point, what happens as a result of my confession? I'm exempt from knas. I already was obligated to pay the principal and the kefel. Right now, I get exempt from paying the extra 3 times payment, right? The difference between 5 and 2. The 2 I already have to pay. The 3 or 2, right? 2 or 3, depending if it was a ser or shor, I don't have to pay. So in my confession, I did not incur any obligation whatsoever. All I did was exempt myself. That's a different type of confession when I go and confess that I actually have to return something, right? In the ganav case, when I admit that I stole, I actually have to return the principal. And I just get exempt from the double. But here, I get exempt from the entire thing. So comes Rav Hamnuna and he says, if in that case where I come and my confession did nothing to obligate me in any way, shape, or form, all it did was exempt me, and then ba'u edim shetavachu machar chayav sharei patar atzmo miklum. There was no skin off my back by admitting this here. I didn't cause any sort of obligation. When I came and admitted that I stole and I now have to pay out of pocket, I incurred some sort of payment. Then we're going to take my confession seriously. And we're going to say, oh, you really meant well and you confessed, we're going to exempt you forever from the knas. And that's where Rav says, even if witnesses come, you're not going to have to pay. But if I did nothing and just exempted myself, but now I don't have to pay the 3 times payment. Well, if witnesses come and say I did it, we're not going to exempt me from, forever. So basically, when the witnesses come, we're now going to obligate. And he distinguishes between those cases. You have to understand this well. That's why I've repeated it a few times, because this is going to be the basis for the rest of today's class. So now, I'm a Rava, kipachti l'sabe dibe Rav. I reprimanded the rabbis, the elders in the house of Rav, meaning Rav Hamnuna, because what he said is ridiculous. Deha Rabban Gamliel poterat momi klum hava. Well, we're going to prove it from the Rabban Gamliel case. When Rabban Gamliel came and said, I blinded my slave, and it was a confession, what was the point? Was he obligating him for anything? No. His admission exempted him from everything, right? Because there only is knas here. There's no payment or anything. So basically his confession meant, if it would have worked, it would have meant that the slave goes free. Now, what happens here, right? The confession would have meant he wanted it to mean the slave goes free, but by confessing, he actually exempts himself from that and the slave stays as his own. So there's no loss whatsoever. And now, what's the important part? Well, listen to what happened and when we brought what happened. Rav was quoted by Rav Huna as saying, Modeh b'knas v'achar kach ba'u edim. Witnesses came later after the confession, you're exempt. Came Rav Chisda and quoted the Rabban Gamliel case and said, look, here you see that if he had witnesses, he would have been obligated. Now, Ka'amar le Rav Chisda le Rav Huna, he quoted this case. Now, what did we just say? If this case where he exempts himself from everything, and after witnesses came, even Rav agrees that you'd be obligated, then what should Rav Huna have answered when Rav Chisda brought this as a question? Oh, even Rav admits this case you're obligated. And that's not what he said. And that's why they're saying, below Kamma. He didn't answer him, oh, Rav agrees in this case, which is what Rav Hamnuna would have said. Rav agrees in this case because the confession was meaningless because it didn't obligate Rabban Gamliel to anything. So even Rav would agree in that case, if witnesses had come, you would have been obligated. So if Rav Hamnuna was right, Rav Huna should have answered that there. So this seems to knock out Rav Hamnuna. However, it's not really the case because right now we're going to say itmar nami. Here it's the second use of itmar today. Here it's just, itmar means ne'emar, it was said. Now we're saying this statement of Rav Hamnuna, even though we just rejected it, was also said by somebody else, okay? Which is, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So now they quote Rabbi Yochanan as saying, Ganavti, if I say I stole, Uba wedim sheganav patul, sharei chayev atzmo b'keren. Aval Amar lo ganav, Uba wedim sheganav, chazar v'amar tavachti u'macharti, Uba wedim shetavach u'machar chayav, sharei patar atzmo miklum. This is exactly what Rav Hamnuna said. Rabbi Yochanan said the same thing. If I came and admitted I stole, since I obligated myself to pay the keren, therefore I'm obligated to, therefore I'm exempt from knas forever, even if witnesses come. But if I was already convicted of the theft and I paid the keren already, or I had to pay the keren already, I was obligated to pay the principal. And now by my coming forward and admitting, tavachti macharti, I slaughtered or I stole or I sold, at that point, my confession doesn't obligate me in anything. So if witnesses come later and say, we saw you slaughter, I'll have to pay the arba b'chamisha payment. So he says the exact same thing. And Rav Ashi is now going to bring both our Mishna, and now we're going to see how our Mishna fits with Rav. Because remember, we started off and said our Mishna says you're liable, and Rav said you're exempt. And then we're going to now see how Rav can read our Mishna. And not only that, but it's going to prove Rav, as opposed to before we said it doesn't fit with Rav at all, and a braita. But the braita we're actually going to reject. Okay, we're going to then say it doesn't really prove it. And the braita is going to be the braita we saw earlier about the people who ran forward, you know, the guy who tried to get there before the witnesses. And then we'll say it's not a good proof because, okay, we'll see. We'll get there. Amar Rav Ashi. So matnita ubraita nami daika. So we can infer both from our Mishnah and from a braita. Matnita, the Mishnah, how so? Ditnan. It says in our Mishnah, ganava pishnayim. So remember the case. Now this is exactly the case we're talking about, which is, I was convicted of stealing by two witnesses already. Then tavachu machar al pi ed echad al pi atzmo. But then I come forward and I confess to the second stage. Either one witness comes and says it, or I confess. Mishalem tashlumei kefil. I have to pay the kefil because I was convicted by witnesses, but I know mishalem tashlumei arba b'chamisha. I don't pay the 4 or 5 payment. So luckily, now they're going to basically say, why did the Tana choose that case? It could have chosen a simpler case. Luckily, did Tana ganava pishnayim. Why did it have to be that I was convicted of theft first? Litni ganav tabachu machar pi ed echad al pi atzmo ino mishalem ela keren. Why didn't it just say if I come and admit that I stole and slaughtered or sold, or one witness said I sold, slaughtered, and stole, then I would only have to pay the Karen, right? Now, in the case where I admit it, right, I would have to bring the principal. Turning out I'm a bet. So why did it specifically choose a case where I was already convicted of stealing and then admitted to the tvicha u'mechira? Elalav hakamashma, is this not coming to teach us exactly what we said? Ganav al pi shnayim v'tavach al pi ed echad o al pi atzmo. If I stole based on two witnesses and then I slaughtered or sold by one witness, or right, meaning one witness came and claims that I slaughtered or sold, or I admitted it in court, hu de lo mechayev atzmo b'keren. Then, sorry, you get rid of the word who. De lo mechayev atzmo b'keren, where my confession did not obligate me to pay the principal because the witnesses already obligated me to pay the principal. And what did my confession do? Didn't obligate me in anything. Exactly like Rav Hamnuna and Rabbi Yochanan said. Now, what was the whole drasha that we got out of the Mishnah? That's the case, specifically when it happens like this, that's the case where it will be like Eid Echad, that if witnesses come later, they can convict me. Right? Just like with Eid Echad, if another witness, and now we're just reviewing what we did in the beginning, but we're using it differently. There we wanted to say this teaches you in general you're going to be liable. Now we're saying, no, it's only in this kind of a case. If I was already convicted of kefel and my admission only was basically meaningless because it didn't make me commit to have to pay anything, it was just exempting me from everything. In that case, then even by my own admission, if witnesses come later, I will have to pay that penalty. But if it were the case it didn't mention in the Mishnah, if I came and admitted the whole thing and witnesses didn't come and convict me of theft, but I said ganav, tavach, umachal, al pi ed echad, al pi atzmo, dechiyev atzmo b'keren, where I actually caused an obligation now. The keren, the principal I have to pay is based on my own admission. Then lo amrin al pi atzmo dumiyad al pi ed echad. Then we won't say that witnesses come later will obligate me. It won't be the case. It won't be like ed echad, because that's not the case the Mishnah talked about. So what we basically did now, as opposed to what we thought in the beginning, that the Mishnah was basically talking about anytime witnesses admit and then, anytime the person themselves admits they did something and then witnesses come, you're going to be liable. Now we're reading the Mishnah in a different way. The Mishnah actually follows Rav according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Hamnuna, which is only in a case like this where my admission did not obligate me in anything. And that's a different way to read the Mishnah. Braita. What's the braita? Detanya. The braita we saw before. And now we're going to focus on those words. We didn't really understand why they were there. So I see witnesses trying to rush to court. Well, I don't know if they were rushing, but they're getting ready to go to court. V'amal, and then I rush ahead of them, and I go to court first, and I say ganavti. I say I stole. Now you could have stopped here, okay? But instead, the quote is ganavti, avalo tavachti v'lo macharti. But I didn't slaughter and I didn't sell. Eino mashalem ela keren. So I only pay the principal. Even, right, we assume this meant even if witnesses come later. Why did it have to say v'amar ganavti avalo tavachti v'lo macharti? It could have just said mitne o ganavti o tavachti macharti. It could have said either I admit that I stole or I admit that I slaughtered and sold. Ela hakamash malan tamad amar ganavti. They specifically had to say ganavti, but I didn't slaughter and steal or sell, which really means as long as I make the claim ganavti, then this will be the case. Then, again, what happens if the eidim come? Then I won't have to pay. But if it was tavachti or macharti, in other words, that's why they specifically said, but not tavachti or macharti. I don't know if this is the case, but it almost reads like amar ganavti. We thought the whole quote was I stole, but I didn't slaughter or sell. But I think the way they're reading it in this reading is I sold, but not a claim of lo tavachti macharti. That claim wouldn't work. It's not part of his quote. It's almost saying, but not a claim of tavachti or macharti. Then I would be patur. But lo amar lo ganavti uba edim sheganav. But if I said I didn't steal, and then witnesses came and said I stole, V'chazar v'amar tavachti macharti. And then I said, and then I come and I admit, after convicted of stealing, I come and admit tavachti macharti. Ba'u edom shetavachu machar. De'lo chayev atzmo b'keren chayav. If I claimed I didn't steal, I didn't admit to the stealing. Witnesses came and said I stole. This is exactly the case we've been discussing. And then I come forward and I admit that I did the second part. I slaughtered or sold. Then I actually will be obligated, because that's not the case they were talking about in the braita. So right now they're using this braita, alma, from here we can infer, hoda'ah detvicha lav hoda'ah, that it's not a real confession. Again, any confession where I don't obligate myself to pay anything doesn't have the same status. It's not exactly like it's not a hoda'ah. Obviously, I won't have to pay at this point the knas, because there's no proof that I did it. Just because I said so, that doesn't obligate me. But if witnesses were to come and provide proof, I would have to pay it. So that's the way they understand the braita. But now the Gemara says, no, don't get so hung up on why those words are there. I'm going to explain them in a different way, okay? Or don't be, not to get so hung up, but don't assume that's the inference to make from the fact that it said, ganavti, but I didn't, tavachti macharti. Amrei lo, ki gufa kamashma. It's actually coming to teach you something else, the fact that it chooses that case and those words. De kevan de amar ganavti, since he said I stole, and then this is going to have nothing to do with our topic, in which case Rav Ashi is not going to be able to prove it from here. Afagav de amar lo tavachti v'lo macharti. Okay, once he says ganavti, I stole, even if he says lo tavachti v'lo macharti, even if he denies the tvicha, forget about admitting it. Let's say he denies it. He says, but I didn't. Okay, he says, he says I stole. Now, when someone admits they steal, what happens? They have to pay the principal. They're exempt from the double payment. If at this point he says, listen, I stole, but I didn't, right? This is the exact quote, but I didn't slaughter and I didn't sell it. Now, even if I didn't admit to the tvicha u'mechira, and witnesses come and say, after I admit to stealing and I'm obligated to keren and exempt myself from the kefel, and then witnesses come forward and say, and that everyone, right, we're going to say, at least according to Rava, I will definitely be exempt from the double payment. So I pay one time, not two times. But now I didn't admit to slaughtering or selling, and witnesses came and said I slaughtered and sold. Now, what would you tell me? You have to pay the arba b'chamisha. So what would I end up paying? Well, I pay the keren, I don't pay the kefel, but then I pay the 3, 4, and 5 times the payment. So in the end, I end up paying, let's say it's a short, and I would have been obligated 5. I end up paying 4 times the payment because I'm exempt from the kefel. Because remember, 4 or 5 doesn't mean 4 or 5. It means the keren, the kefel, plus another 3. So comes the Gemara now and says, that braita is basically saying that if I don't admit to the tvicha u'mechira and someone convicts me of it, if I'm not obligated to pay the kefel, I don't have to pay the arba b'chamisha. Why? This is an interesting drasha. My time at tashlumei chamasha, amar rachmana v'lo tashlumei arba'a v'lo tashlumei shlosha. The Torah said you pay 5 tachat ashur. 5 means it's going to be 5 complete ones. If you got exempt from kefel, you will never incur payment for those 3 or the 2 or 3 extra. Okay, this is basically saying there's no such thing as a partial arba'a v'chamisha payment. Once the kefel is no longer there because I admitted about the theft first, which now I'm exempt from the kefel forever, even if I didn't admit to the tvicha u'mechira, so that's why they specifically brought this case. If I say ganavti, avalo tavachti v'lo macharti, eino mishalem ela keren. If I deny the claim about the tvicha u'mechira, since I'm already exempt from kefel, I don't have to pay the arba b'chamisha ever, even if witnesses come. That's what it was teaching you. This has absolutely nothing to do with an admission about tvicha u'mechira. Okay. So again, what have we done? We started with machloket Rav and Shmuel. Okay, before that we got a little into the Mishna seemed to go against Rav. Then we brought a question on Rav from a different source, the Tavi case. Then the Rabbi Gamliel and Tavi Abdo. We answered it. Then we moved to this machloket Rav and Shmuel. We asked a question on Shmuel from this braita, which we just went back to now. Then we suggested that Rav Hamnuna says we're going to limit, right there we made a distinction between running, right, when you basically go because you're scared the witnesses are coming and not, perhaps we made some distinction there in order to answer Shmuel. Then we went to Rav Hamnuna, who limits Rav to a case where your admission actually incurs a penalty, right, a payment. If your admission incurs a payment and gets you out of something else, then we're going to exempt you. But when it doesn't, then not. Now, I see you're asking that there is a partial payment of 4 or 5. That's different. You're obligated the whole 4 or 5. It's just you're only obligated to one partner and not the other, so you're going to end up paying half. That's a little different. Okay, now we're going to suggest. So now, after bringing Rav Hamnuna and knocking it down, we brought Rabbi Yochanan, who says the same thing of Rav Hamnuna, and now basically we're dealing with that. Rav Ashi brought a Mishna, our Mishna, and a braita to prove it. Then the Gemara basically rejected the braita and said, you can't necessarily prove from the braita, but still we have the proof from our Mishna. Now we're going to suggest that maybe it's a machloket tannaim. We're going to get into a source that first we're not going to fully understand, and then we're going to have to figure out what's it talking about, and then we're going to assume it's talking about this. And then suggest, oh, this is a machloket tannaim, and reject it, then have a problem with the rejection. That's what we're going to do till the end of today. So lema ketanai, hayu shnayim idim shaganav. Okay, lema ketanai means, let's suggest that this is a machloket tannaim. There were 2 people that testified that I stole. Vayu shnayim idim oto shetavach umachal. And then 2 witnesses come and say that I stole, that I slaughtered and sold. Okay, that sounds pretty basic, but what's going to happen here? Huzmu edei geneva. Okay, we talked about this before. If the witnesses about the theft became edim zomimim, well, the other witnesses are irrelevant because if I didn't steal, then the tvicha u'mechira is irrelevant. Once we knock out the first group, we knock out the rest of them. Okay, now, huzmu edei tvicha, but what if the second group gets knocked out, the ones who testify about the second stage? Well, the obvious is, hu mishalem tashlume kefel. So since the 2 witnesses who said I stole are still in existence, I have to pay kefel. And the ones who tried to do kasher zamam, who lied about the tvicha u'mechira, they're going to have to pay the extra 3. Now here comes the complicated line. That was very straightforward. Mishum sumchus amru. They said in the name of sumchus, hen mishamim tashlume kefel. The witnesses paid double. V'hu mishalem tashlume shlosha leparush na'im la'ayil. And me, the thief, who was convicted of having stolen, but not of having done tvicha u'mechira, or at least that's what we think, would have to pay the 3 payment, or the 2, depending on if it was a par or an aisle, which is the same as a shor or a set. Okay, so this doesn't make any sense. So first of all, maybe he's talking about the first case, the reisha. If he's talking about the reisha, that doesn't make sense. That if the Eidim who said I stole, were knocked out, well then, of course, I'm not liable for the tvicha u'mechira. That's what it sounds like, the simple reading, because in that case, what would happen? If we accepted the Eidei tvicha, so again, the 2 witnesses that said I stole would have to pay double, because they tried to get me to pay double. The ones who said tvicha u'mechira would convict me of the 2 or 3 payment. But that can't possibly be, because how could I be convicted of slaughtering or selling if there's no proof that I stole? That doesn't make any sense. Ella aseifa must be talking about the second part. But if that's the second part, shapir Kamma Rabbanan, hu mishalem tashlume kefel v'hem mishalem tashlume shlosha. If the Eidei tvicha get knocked out, then Kamma are definitely right. There's no other way to read it. That the people, right, the person who was convicted, me, the thief, was convicted of theft, I'd have to pay double. And the Eidim Zomimim will have to pay the shlosha, not the opposite way. So it doesn't make any sense. So the only way to understand sumchus is to say, there must be some other machloka between them. Kigon, for example, de'atu beit shrei, amr le ganavta, va'amr lehu in ganavti v'tavachti u'macharti. So now what's the case? 2 people come and say, you stole. To me. I say, well, you're right. I stole. And by the way, I'm going to admit that you only claimed I stole, but tavachti u'macharti, I also slaughtered and stole and sold. Mihu, but lo b'fnechem ganavti. But by the way, you were not there, okay? I know you weren't there. And not only do I know you were not there, but I tesade vaziminu delo ba'apayu ganav. And 2 witnesses came. I bring 2 witnesses to court that say you were with us, to the first group of witnesses. You were with us on this and this day, not where the theft happened. So I admit to the theft. We knock out, right? I admit to the theft, I admit to the tvicha u'mechira, and we knock out the first Eidim because they were Eidim zomim. Now, the case continues. V'aite sade, then aite balabayit sade, and then the owner comes, v'asidu be de ganav tavach u'machal, and he brings witnesses now that say, I stole, I slaughtered, I sold after I admitted. Okay? So now, b'hoda'at tvicha kamiflage, and what's their whole machloket about? Admission about the tvicha, which again doesn't obligate me for anything. Now, my hoda'ah about stealing is only because the witnesses already said I stole. So because of that, we don't take that confession so seriously, because I was only saying it because they already convicted me of doing it. Now, it's true I bought edim that knocked them out, but basically I was trying to say, yeah, I agree with you. That's not relevant. But the hoda'ah de tficha, hoda'ahi upatul. But the rabbis basically say, the fact that I admitted to the tficha, that's an admission, and I'm exempt, because they don't care that I didn't obligate myself in anything there, because they disagree with Rav Hamnuna. That's our whole point. We want to show this machloket tannaim. And sumchus saval, kevan de hoda'ah de gneva machmat edimu de kamode, de tficha lav hoda'ah. Okay, because the hoda'ah de gneva was all because of machmat edim. So for sure, right? That's not considered hoda'ah. And therefore, tficha is lav hoda'ah. The tficha is not he agrees with Tana Kamma, we separate. The gneva was just because of the first guys. So that's not considered really a hoda'ah. The second is a hoda'ah. The tficha part is not a hoda'ah because I don't obligate myself in anything. V'hanach edim kamai da'azminhu. So what does Sumchus say? Now let's go back to what he said. Sumchus said the words were, hein mishamim tashlumei kefel. The first group of witnesses, they became edim zomimim for gneva. So they have to pay the kefel, mishamim tashlumei kefel, v'hu mishalem tashlumei shlosha l'parish naim la'ayil. Because what does he say? Even though tficha, right, because tficha is lav hoda'ah, the fact that witnesses later came and convicted me for it, I am now obligated to pay. Okay, so that's basically what the machloket between them is all about. It was very convoluted, but that came out to exactly our topic. Amar le Rav Acha b'reid Rav Ika, lo. That's not true. You misunderstood the machloket. Dekule alma, everyone agrees, hoda'ah de tficha lav hoda'ah. That's not really an admission, and therefore, if witnesses come after, we don't accept. And I have to pay, because everyone agrees with Rav Hamnuna and Rabbi Yochanan, what we've been saying all along, which is if I incurred no obligation from that admission, it's irrelevant. And Adam will come, I'll have to. What's their machloket? Something else entirely. What is that? This is an interesting machloket. If it's a testimony that Adim Zomimim can't ever knock out, okay, the classic case we'll see in a minute is if two witnesses come to court and they say, we saw you steal, we don't know what day it was. Okay, well, first of all, that looks like they're lying, because what do you mean you don't know what day? And since no one can ever come and say, well, you were with us on that day because you didn't give a particular day, we don't accept that testimony in court. There's a machloket. Maybe we do, because you're still saying you saw me steal. What's the difference if you don't remember what day it happened? So that's the machloket here. Now, what's the issue? Well, why can't you be mezim the last group of witnesses? Because I already admitted that I stole, slaughtered, or sold. So when they come to court, no one can knock them out, because even I agreed. What's the whole idea? I said, I agree that I did this. So when they come, they can't get knocked out because you have to say one more point. They're going to explain it right now. You'll see why. They have to add one more point here. Two witnesses came and said, I stole. You're right. I stole. And not only that, and here come the extra words. Okay. He already said, not in front of you, that we already had. But it was in front of Reuben and Shimon that I did it. Okay. And then I brought Edim Zimim that said, we were with you on that day. So you definitely weren't there, just like I claimed. But then Reuven and Shimon come to court. Now I already admitted that Reuven and Shimon saw me steal. So that is testimony that can't be undone because I already admitted to it. And I agreed with them. And that's the machloket. I don't have to pay on the tfichon because that's an irrelevant testimony. But Sumchus said this is edut. Okay, so that's basically, then we're basically saying this machloket has nothing to do with modeh b'knas b'achar kach ba'u edim patur. And are we going to distinguish between gneva and tficha with chira? Because tficha, we're going to say, is not really a hoda'ah because I didn't incur any cost. And yet one side said I have to pay 3 and the other side said I didn't have to pay 3. And that's the machloket. Do we hold like Rav Hamnuna or not? No, the machloket is, this is a, and then they added those words that I said, it wasn't in front of you, it was in front of 2 other people. And then those 2 people come, since they can't be knocked out in court, do we accept them or not? Okay, is that good testimony or is it not? To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? If you missed the point about edut she'iyata cholazima, what is edut she'iyata cholazima? As I said before, if the witnesses come and said, I don't know what day it happened, or I don't know what time, or I don't know what city, well, that's already weakening their testimony. It makes it look like they're liars because they don't really have all the facts straight. But in this case, they don't look like they're liars. It's true you can't knock it out in court. But why? You can't knock it out in court because it's strengthened by the fact that I admit. It actually looks more like truth than falsehood. So therefore, this case, even if you say edut she'iyata cholazima is not edut, in this case, it would be edut because it's more closer on the false true line. It's much closer to true than it is to false. Whereas, right? And then that's not what iyata cholazima is. That's something else. So in the end, it could be that the machloket is what we thought it was, the machloket whether you hold by Rav Hamnuna or Rabbi Yochanan. With that, we're going to finish. I already did all the summaries earlier in the daf, so we're going to stop here. Wishing everyone a good day, hoping for a safer day in this country.